So I'm going to convert my performance road bike from Downtube shifters to STI shifters. Right now I'm running an 8-speed cassette, but I do have a 9-speed cassette. The only issue is it's a 12 to 23 gear combination. That's pretty hard for the hills out here, but I can only do what I can with what I got. This is not going to be a tutorial necessarily. There is a tutorial that I highly recommend watching from RJ the Bike Guy. One of the greatest channels. I've learned so much from it. It's more of documenting an experimental setup because right now, I just don't know if I can get this Quill stem on these compact drop bars due to the sharp bends of the drop bars. Whereas a traditional drop bar is fairly large, so it's way easier to get a Quill stem on. So I wanted to find compact drop bars that had the same amount of drop as my bars that I have right now. And with these, I would say that is extremely close. But I wanted a shorter reach on the top of the bars, and the reason being is my Shimano 4500 STI shifters have quite a bit of reach. That's pretty standard for STI shifters anymore. But the combination with the STI shifters having that reach and the traditional bars is the top of the bars are so far. Combined with this, the reach is insanely far and it made riding it quite uncomfortable. Originally, I was going to do this conversion for my Diamondback Master TG road bike, but right now the seat post clamp is just not holding the seat post and I keep having it slip on my rides. I'm still trying to diagnose it, but I hope I don't have to retire this frame because I love riding it, but the seat post keeps dropping every single time I ride. So I'm just gonna do this conversion on my performance road bike. All right, before I continue on, I don't want to get too far into the video or the project and not have this work. So let's just go ahead and try to put this Quill stem on these compact drop bars. So with Quill stems, they have this design where it is more narrow here at the bottom than at the top. So you're able to navigate around the bends of the bars easier. That's just a design that's not discussed much online. Normally I would have this part on this side and then you can navigate around the bend here, but I'm coming up to a problem where I just can't figure it out quite yet. So as I suspected, getting around this bend of the bar is really hard, and I think I may have an idea. I honestly can't believe I got it. So part of me wishes I recorded the process putting this on, but then the other aspect is it took a while. So of course the bend was causing an issue getting this on, and you don't want to manhandle it. I mean, you just don't want to dent it or bend anything. What I did was I removed the wedge nut, I guess that's what you call it. Then it allowed me to have just a little bit of leeway where, as you can see, there's a tiny bit of scratching, but I never forced it. I never pushed really hard. I just it was right about here. It was just not going. I honestly thought I couldn't complete this step, but just wiggling it and slowly pushing, not too hard once again, and it got on. So I am so stoked that I officially have passed the biggest hurdle, in my opinion, and we can keep continuing this project. So after I remove the Downtube shifters and the bars and everything, I'm going to store it. So if I want to go back to a Downtube shifter setup, I could just reinstall everything. Once again, I'm using the Shimano Tiagra 4500 STI shifters. In my opinion, these are highly underrated. The reason being is they still have the external cables for the shifting. So if you have any shifting problems, the at-home mechanic, you can really diagnose everything. You don't have to rip up your bar tape to check. Also with this style, it still has quite a bit of grip here, so I can get in the arrow hood position really easily and have a decent amount of grip. And I just love the feel of these. The newer ones are pretty cool, but I would pick these over the newer ones. Also, I still don't know why this didn't catch on. There is a gear indicator in the hoods, and I actually think that's pretty cool. And before you go saying it's kind of a newbie feature, if you go on eBay, there is an inline gear indicator that you can buy that has the Durace logo on it. So I don't know what happened with that. So when I'm installing STI shifters on compact drop bars, there are two key points that I want to adjust for. One is making sure that the transition from the bars to the hoods is as flat as possible. When I was just starting doing my own maintenance, I've had it where it was too far down, I've had it where it was too far up. So that's one key adjustment that I always want to make sure is just right. The second one is once I get both STI shifters on the bars, I'll set it on a flat surface and do that rocking technique where you make sure there's no wobble. So you'll push on the ends of the bars or the STI shifters, and if it's wobbly, you can adjust it and make sure that it just sits completely flat. But also make sure your surface is flat. I've had it where I thought I was just not adjusting it correctly, but the wood surface was warped or something like that. Okay, so it's another day. I had to postpone doing the project because work. But I finished the bars, I lined up my STI shifters how I want them. And as you can see here, there's no wobble to them when I put them on my toolbox. I have the angles set up how I want. I don't like them turned inwards. I tried that in the past and I'm just not really a fan. But the next step is disassembling everything. Let's do this. Just showing these Downtube shifters have the same light action as the Durace shifters in my previous video. And here's another reason. I just love old school setups. They're so easy to work on. I can keep all this together, and if I wanted to change my bar setup and shifting setup in the future again, just disassemble, reassemble, and I'm running Downtube shifters again. And there you go, everything is disassembled, shifters are off, the bars are officially disconnected along with the brake cables, and it literally took not even 5 minutes. So before installing the Quill stem, I'm going to grease up the bolt and the pinch nut and just around the stem as well so it doesn't seize up in the future. But I never keep parts on long enough for it to seize up, so. So whenever I'm installing a setup with a Quill stem, I always leave it a lot higher than what I normally ride. And the reason being is when I cut the cables and put everything together, it's better to have a little extra length than not enough. And then you're only limited to a certain height. Whereas if you have a little bit extra cable length, then that's no problem. You can adjust as you please and find the most comfortable position. Next, I'm gonna install the cable stops on the Downtube bosses here on the frame. There's two versions that I have. There's an all black version, and then there's a silver version, which obviously with the theme of silver components, I'm gonna go with these. I tighten them just snug enough, but never crank them down, and always barrel adjuster on the bottom, not the top. So I have a few different shifter cable housings from previous setups, and it looks like I have one that's pre-cut that works perfectly, and I'll show you the general shape of the cable housings that I have on here just so it's not too much of a bend where your shifting performance is affected, and it's not too large where it just looks goofy. Now I will say they're ever so slightly too long, but I don't think this is a big deal. It's not gonna bother me when I'm testing out the bike and tuning it for the next week or so. But basically, you don't want these overlapping so far that they're sticking out so far out, it just looks really bad. But then you don't want these not crossing too much, because then when you turn the handlebars, it's gonna bind and cause some shifting problems. Like I mentioned before, let's say this is actually too low for my liking. I can raise it up and I still have some leeway with the length of the shifter cable housings. By the way, these are just Jaguar from eBay. They're ridiculously long, but that's always good. Better long than short. Once again, with the simplicity of vintage bikes, routing all of that took less than 2 minutes. So when I'm starting to adjust everything and tensioning the cables, I adjust the barrel adjuster and the rear derailleur a few turns, but then also I turn the barrel adjusters up on the top a few turns as well. And that way, that's the best part of having Downtube bosses for the shifter cables, because you can adjust while you're riding instead of having to stop, adjust the barrel adjuster, and then getting back on, seeing if that works out. So that's another feature I love about having STI shifters with a vintage frame that has Downtube bosses. So I know my front derailleur is adjusted correctly because I didn't change the crankset. But then also, let's say I have to adjust it just a little bit, I now have a barrel adjuster for the front derailleur. So at this point, I'm going to switch from clamping the top tube to the seat post, because I'm gonna start cranking, adjusting, and you don't want this to wobble too much, or what will wind up happening is the bike will slide on the bike stand clamp, and you have these cable routing guides that you do not want to bend or snap off. Another tip that I'm guilty of is if you're wearing a hat, turn it backwards, because your visor will get stuck in the spokes and everything. Nice. With routing the brake cable housing, I'll pretty much feed it through and see what that bend is gonna look like right here where it comes to the cable routing guides. And in my opinion, I don't do the full 90-degree turn. I do close to that, because nothing looks worse than this bend for the back brake cable being too large, and it just looks really bad. But of course, you don't wanna have it too close where it will bind and actually cause the brakes to actuate when you turn the handlebars. So just a nice happy medium, but not too large. You don't want floppy cables. And then towards the rear, have a slight elevation, so it's not being pulled too hard from the rim brake. And then when I do figure out the exact place, I'll dig my fingernail in it and then just begin cutting. Luckily for the front cable, when you turn the handlebars, it doesn't bind on anything. However, you still want a little bit of length, because if you need to raise or lower the stem, you at least give yourself a little bit of leeway in regards to the cable housing length. You always want to make sure that that is seated in the braking lever. So the other day I rode my Diamondback road bike with the H+7 wheel set. I tried to stick to only the 23 tooth cog and tried the hills out here. Yeah, it just wasn't gonna work out. So I actually took the H+7 wheel set and put it on this bike that was on my Diamondback, but I put it on my performance road bike, and honestly, I think it fits the part a little bit better. The mid-90s had STI shifters, thin steel tubes, and deeper section wheel sets. So I think it's fitting. Now I finished all the cable routing, the adjustments for the brakes and everything. So the last part is just wrapping the handlebars with the handlebar tape. Another thing I've been doing recently is taking black hockey tape. You can do this with electrical tape too, that's black, and putting it around the silver clamp from the STI shifters. That way you can be a little bit sloppy with wrapping your bars. And if there's any cracks around this area in your wrapping, then the silver won't be as obvious and the black really covers it nicely. Around here, I always check if there's any weird lumps or I didn't wrap it correctly, but so far, so good. Yay, now I gotta go all the way back. Right about here, I always stop and make sure the grips are even, so one's not super thick and one's super skinny. Another thing I do is I put the black hockey tape on the frame itself where the shifter cable housing rubs against the frame, because you will rub away the paint on your frame. Yeah, I'm actually really happy that I did this conversion on this bike. I think it's more fitting. It's an early 90s bike, so STI shifters were coming into the game. It's probably gonna be more proper with STI shifters and a little bit of the deeper section wheel set. When you start projects, you have a vision, you have an idea, but things always change. Like I mentioned, instead of the 12 to 23 tooth claw combination, I went with the 12 to 25. That one extra gear really helps with the hills out here. I switched to the H+ Sun SL42 wheel set. I've had these wheels for so long and they're still great. The brake track is still flat too, because I always measure it, and they just keep going and going. So once again, thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and liking the video. My next video will be the first ride video, so if you want to see that, stay subscribed.